My name is Lillian. I turned 31 last weekend. Though I hesitate even to call it a celebration. Birthdays have always been strange in my family, something we acknowledged, but rarely cherished. I can't remember the last time my parents actually made me feel like I mattered on mine. But this year, something felt especially off from the moment I received the message. It came from my mother. A simple text: dinner at Bellagio's, 7 p.m. Saturday, we're celebrating your birthday. Come. No emojis, no happy birthday in advance, no warmth, just that. And what caught my eye more than anything was a phrasing: we're celebrating your birthday. Not you're invited to celebrate or we want to celebrate with you. But we're celebrating, like the event was already happening with or without my presence. Still, part of me, maybe the last flicker of hope I had left for them, wanted to believe this year would be different. Maybe they were trying. Maybe they remembered how last year they barely sent a text. Maybe this dinner would be their version of a gesture. I tried not to read into the coldness of the message. I tried to silence the voice inside me that whispered, you know exactly what this is. It wasn't that my parents and I were estranged. In any official way, we were still family, at least on paper. But for as long as I can remember, I was always the extra person. The one who didn't quite fit the mold they wanted to present to the world. My brother was the pride of the family, married, stable, a father, a mortgage, a dog. Meanwhile, I was single and wondering. That's what they call it at family dinners. With forced chuckles and tight smiles, they never understood my job, never asked much about it. And when I tried to explain, they changed the subject. So when I got that text, I debated whether to go at all. But I did. Maybe I went for closure. Maybe I went to give them one last chance to prove me wrong. Or maybe I just wanted to see what would happen if I stopped avoiding them and faced them head on. The day of the dinner, I dressed simply but elegantly. Nothing flashy, just a black silk blouse, dark jeans, and flats. I arrived at Bellagio's 10 minutes early, just in case. The restaurant was beautiful: white tablecloths, gold trim, chandeliers catching the light. As I walked in, I immediately spotted the table. Long, full of people I knew well: my parents, my brother and his family, a few cousins, even a family friend or two. I saw the laughing, the wine being poured, the plates half full. But what I didn't see was a place for me. I stood there, quietly, for a moment too long. No one noticed me, or rather, they all pretended not to. I approached the table slowly, scanning for an empty chair, a pulled-out place setting. Something to indicate they'd expected me. Nothing. Every seat was taken. Every plate already served. I cleared my throat. That's when my mother turned and looked at me with the same disapproving eyes I'd grown up under. Oh, she said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. Didn't think you'd show. Then, after a second glance around, she added with a laugh, well, looks like we're full. Guess you can find a spot on the sidewalk. It took a moment for it to register. Her tone was so casual, her laughter so careless. I looked around expecting anyone to step in. But no one did, not even my brother. Not even the aunt who once called me the special one. They were all in on it. Or at least complicit. A few giggled. My uncle chuckled. Oh, come on, let her sit on your lap, Rick, nudging my father, who just smirked and sipped his wine. I felt something unravel inside me. It wasn't anger at first, it was disbelief. Even after all these years of knowing how they treated me, I hadn't expected this. Not public rejection. Not outright humiliation in a fancy restaurant in front of everyone. I stood frozen for a second longer, then turned without a word. As I walked back toward the valet, my mother's voice rang behind me. You could have told us you were coming. We didn't reserve an extra chair for just anyone. The words hit me like glass shattering against my skin. I kept walking. Outside, the air was cool. The kind of evening breeze that usually feels refreshing. But not that night. That night, it just made me feel hollow. I stood on the sidewalk, alone. The laughter from the restaurant echoing behind me like a distant parade I was never meant to be part of. And there on the curb, I made a quiet promise to myself. This is the last time they make me feel invisible. The last time they laugh at my presence. The last time I walk toward them hoping to be seen. I didn't cry. Not then. I think I had done all my crying years ago. In empty bedrooms and echoing silence after phone calls that never came, I got in my car and drove home. The tears didn't come that night, not even when I curled into bed still dressed. What came was clarity. I saw them for what they were, and for the first time in my life, I saw myself for what I truly was, not broken, not lesser, not a disappointment, just different and stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. That dinner wasn't a celebration. It was a funeral, the burial of the version of me that kept waiting for their acceptance. And once it was over, I felt something close to peace. I walked back into that night more times than I care to admit. Even now, I can close my eyes and feel the subtle chill of the restaurant's air conditioning hitting my neck. As I stood just Inside the entryway, watching my family laugh and talk, wine glasses lifted, napkins resting on their laps, food half finished and not a single empty seat waiting for me. It was as if they were reenacting a dinner they'd rehearsed 1,000 times before, one where I simply didn't exist. The hostess had already taken my coat. Unaware of what I was about to walk into, she asked me quietly, "Are you joining the party for Peterson?" And I nodded. She smiled kindly, gestured toward the long table near the window, and then stepped aside. That moment, that single breath before I approached, felt like the edge of a cliff, and I was about to jump. I moved toward them slowly, looking for even one spot that hadn't been filled. I checked twice. No plate with my name. No extra chair pushed to the side. No one making room or shifting slightly. I stood directly at the end of the table for what felt like minutes. I could hear their voices louder now. Casual, relaxed. The cadence of people who had no idea they were being watched, or worse, they did know, and didn't care. Then my mother noticed me, or pretended to notice me for the first time. She turned, with her wine glass in hand, and smiled, not kindly, but the way you smile when something inconvenient shows up at the wrong time. "Oh, Lillian," she said, emphasizing my name like I was a surprise guest at someone else's wedding. "You made it after all." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My voice was caught behind a knot forming in my throat. She looked around the table, examining the space like it was some elaborate mystery. "Well," she said, clearly amused, "we seem to be full up." Then she laughed loudly, not just a chuckle, it was sharp, cutting. "Guess you'll have to sit on the sidewalk, huh?" There it was, the punchline. She looked around for approval, and she got it. My father snorted. An uncle I hadn't seen in years grinned, and leaned over to whisper something to the cousin beside him, who then also laughed. My brother avoided my eyes. Even my niece giggled, though she probably didn't understand why. There were empty chairs, not at the main table, but around the restaurant. A waiter tried to intervene, gesturing toward an unused bistro table against the far wall. "Would you like to sit here?" he asked quietly, like he sensed something wrong. I shook my head. I stood in that moment, realizing something brutal. This wasn't an oversight. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't that they had forgotten to save me a seat. It was planned. Or at the very least, it was a setup they were all too willing to enjoy. And I knew why. I'd made them uncomfortable, my choices, my independence, my success, all achieved outside their definitions of acceptable. They never understood what I did for a living. Not really. I had explained once or twice how I started a nonprofit consulting firm, how we helped restructure failing organizations, how I spoke at panels, and was flown to events to speak about social impact strategies. But none of it mattered in their eyes. I wasn't married, I didn't have children. I didn't wear their version of success. I wasn't them, and that meant I didn't deserve a seat at their table. Literally. My mother raised her eyebrows at me as if daring me to say something I didn't, I couldn't, not there. Not surrounded by glasses clinking and forced laughter, and decades of dismissal wrapped up in linen napkins. So I left. I didn't make a scene. I didn't cry. I didn't plead for respect or a seat. I simply turned around and walked out. The valet attendant was startled to see me back so soon. "Forgot something?" he asked. I shook my head. "Didn't belong in there," I said. He didn't press further. I sat in the car for a long time after he handed me the keys. I didn't drive right away, just sat there, hands on the wheel, staring through the windshield at the bright restaurant lights spilling across the sidewalk. Like the spotlight from a stage I never agreed to perform on. They didn't come out. Not even to check. Not even to ask if I was okay. They had their dinner, they toasted, they laughed. They moved on. And me, I drove home, quiet, calm. But inside, something had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't wondering why they didn't love me the way I needed to be loved. I wasn't asking what I did wrong, or how I could fix it. I finally saw it clearly. They didn't see me, not really, and maybe they never would. I was done chasing a seat at a table that had been built to exclude me from the start. And deep down, I knew this birthday would be the last one I ever spent with any illusion about what family was supposed to be. The next morning, the world would learn who I truly was. But tonight, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of rejection without sugarcoating it. I allowed myself to grieve what could have been, and to prepare for the story that was about to begin, because the truth was coming, and this time it wouldn't be ignored. The thing about pain is that sometimes it doesn't come from screaming or insults or breaking things. Sometimes it arrives dressed in laughter, sharp, rehearsed, and echoed by people who share your blood. That night, as I stood at the edge of that long table, the laughter became a symphony of cruelty, and I realized something I hadn't fully admitted to myself before. I was never really part of them. I was just the background character in their perfect family portrait, and now, they were erasing me in front of everyone. I didn't flinch when my mother said it. Go sit on the curb, Lillian, haha. She laughed like it was the best joke she had told all year, eyes glinting with the kind of mockery only a parent who never respected you can deliver. It was a casual, venomous dismissal, the kind meant to sting without leaving visible bruises. What struck me more than her words were the reactions around her. My father didn't even look at me. He just sipped his drink and gave that half laugh he always gave when she insulted me. Like it was all a silly game. My uncle, the one who used to call me smart girl when I was younger, gave a wheezy chuckle and turned away, pretending to read the menu again. My cousin raised his eyebrows and smirked. A neighbor I hadn't seen in years leaned toward my mother and whispered something, making her laugh louder. Even the waiter who had offered me the side table froze, unsure whether to intervene again or disappear. The table that was supposed to celebrate my life had turned into a stage for humiliation. My name was a punchline, my presence an inconvenience. I stood there, not because I didn't know what to do. I stood there because I was stunned by how deliberate it all was. I glanced at the plates. Every single one was half full, fancy appetizers, wine glasses, candles flickering. They had ordered, they had started. They had planned this. There was no room for me, not just physically, emotionally, symbolically. It was a message. You don't belong here. I could hear the hum of the city outside the window. A street performer was singing a love song half a block away. The rhythm of traffic was muffled by the thick glass, but somehow it still reached me, as if reminding me that life existed beyond these walls, beyond this family, beyond this table, where my worth had just been publicly reduced to nothing. I didn't say a word. I didn't ask for a chair. I didn't demand answers. And that silence seemed to unnerve them more than anything. My mother tilted her head. You're not going to say anything, just standing there like a statue. She laughed again, but her voice was tighter now. She didn't like not being able to control my reaction. She wanted tears or a scene, or rage, but all I gave her was silence. The longer I stood there, the more awkward the air became. Conversations died out. Even the giggles began to feel forced. People started shifting in their seats, pretending to check their phones. One of my aunts looked at me and then quickly looked away as if ashamed, but not enough to speak. I took one final look around the table, at the people I had once called family, and turned around. My shoes echoed faintly as I walked back through the restaurant. I didn't hurry. I didn't run. Each step was deliberate, grounded, real. The same hostess who had welcomed me with a smile just an hour ago now avoided eye contact. I guess she didn't know what to say. I didn't blame her. Outside, the air was cool against my skin. The lights of the restaurant spilled onto the sidewalk like a spotlight trailing me as I left. Somewhere behind me, laughter resumed, hesitant. At first, then louder, as if my departure had finally cleared the awkwardness. As if the show could go on now that the outcast had exited the stage. But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know that in less than 12 hours, their perfect little illusion was going to collapse, because I had finally decided that I owed them nothing, not my silence, not my tolerance, not my presence, and certainly not my forgiveness. When I reached my car, I sat down in the driver's seat and let myself breathe. Deep, slow, measured. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My lipstick was still perfect. My eyes were dry, but there was a flicker of something new in them, not sadness, not pain. Resolve. That was the moment I decided to release them. To release the need to be accepted. To stop begging for a love they were never capable of giving. That moment of mockery was their final performance in my story. They didn't know it, but they had just written themselves out of my life, permanently. And as the engine hummed beneath me, and the city lights blurred into a soft glow around me, I realized that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away in silence. Because the louder story, the one they couldn't control, was about to be told by headlines, by voices that mattered, by truths too big to ignore, and they would never be able to laugh at me again. I didn't look back. Not once. Every step I took away from that restaurant felt like a layer of dead skin peeling off. The air outside was cold, but it didn't bite. It welcomed me, as if the world beyond that glass box of shame had been waiting for me to finally see it, truly see it for what it was. Freedom. My heels clicked softly against the pavement, and the sound was strangely soothing, rhythmic, like a heartbeat calming down after years of being strained by expectations, guilt, and humiliation. I didn't cry. Not then. Not as I opened the car door. Not as I sat behind the wheel with the silence of the city pressing gently against the windows. The truth was, I had cried so many times before that my tears had gone dry long ago. Cried behind bathroom doors. At school plays I wasn't invited to, on birthdays they pretended to forget. In the corners of dinners, where I was allowed to sit if I promised not to speak much. I had felt invisible for years. But this time was different. Because they saw me standing, they saw me silent. They saw me walk away, and they didn't stop me, not because they didn't want to, but because they thought they'd won. They didn't understand what they'd done. They didn't know they had just given me the greatest gift of all. I put my hands on the steering wheel, not to drive, but to feel something solid, to remind myself that I was still here, that I existed outside of them, that I had built a life beyond the roles they forced on me, that I had value even if they couldn't see it. I stared at the traffic light across the street, blinking yellow in that lazy rhythm, and I thought, if I drive now, if I go home and do nothing, they'll win, not just tonight, but forever. If I stay quiet, they'll keep thinking their story is the only one that matters, that I'm the afterthought, the leftover, the weak one. But I wasn't weak, I had just been quiet. I had taken too much for too long, not because I lacked strength but because I had too much love, too much hope. I had believed over and over that maybe they'd change, that maybe if I succeeded enough, smiled enough, showed up enough, they'd finally let me in. But tonight taught me something I should have known years ago. They don't want me at the table, not because I'm unworthy but because I remind them of everything they chose to ignore in themselves. And that's when the decision came. It didn't arrive with a lightning bolt or a surge of adrenaline. It came quietly, like a whisper from a version of myself I had buried long ago. End it, not my life. No, I had too much of that left. But end the begging and the silence and the illusion. I picked up my phone. I still had the draft, the article I had written months ago, after signing the biggest deal of my career. It was supposed to be published next quarter in a quiet feature about women in leadership. But I had always hesitated, thought it might bring too much attention, that it might be too proud, that maybe I should ask my parents if it was okay to put the family name in it. I laughed out loud, a real laugh, the first in weeks, the kind that comes from the gut, when you realize how ridiculous you've been trying to protect people who never once protected you. I opened my email. No hesitation this time. I sent the article, with the updated photo, the one taken just last week, me standing in front of the headquarters we just opened, smiling, confident, unapologetically visible. The subject line read, for immediate release. Then I turned off the engine. I didn't drive home right away. I sat there, parked across from the same restaurant where my mother had told me to sit on the curb. I watched as the night continued, as the party inside resumed. I could see them through the window laughing, eating, oblivious. I didn't feel hatred. I didn't feel rage. I felt closure. They had written me out of their lives long before tonight. I just hadn't accepted it yet. But now I had, and what I was about to do, sharing my story. Not for revenge, not for applause, but for truth, was not about them. It was about every person who had ever been told they were too much, too little, too invisible. It was for the girls who sat alone at birthdays, for the sons who watched their siblings get all the praise, for anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong at the table. I was done knocking on locked doors. From now on, I would build my own. And as a streetlight turned green, I smiled, not because I was over it, not because the pain was gone, but because I had finally taken the first real step away from them, and toward myself. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was in pain, not in the way they might have expected. It wasn't grief that kept me awake, it was clarity. The kind that floods in like a tide when you finally move the boulders that blocked it for years. For the first time in over a decade, I felt like I was seeing my life with honest eyes. Not the version I curated to appear grateful, or the one I edited to make my parents proud, or even the version I toned down to avoid outshining the siblings they always preferred. No. That night, in the quiet dark of my apartment, with only the hum of the refrigerator and the blinking of the city lights outside, I opened the mental vault I had sealed shut for so long. The vault where I had stored all the years, all the bruises that weren't on the skin but still ached, all the little humiliations I had swallowed like broken glass with a smile. They never knew. They never knew about the night I sat in the corner of the living room while everyone celebrated my brother's scholarship and no one mentioned the fact that I had already been accepted into the top universities. They never knew how I packed my own things in a trash bag the day they told me, "We need your room now. Lillian, your brother is coming back from college and we're renting the basement." They didn't ask where I went. They didn't care. They didn't know that I lived out of my car for 3 weeks, working 2 jobs, one at a bookstore, one cleaning offices at night. They didn't know I used the public library restroom to wash my hair and iron my blouse before a job interview that eventually got me into the company that would become the foundation of my success. They didn't know how I studied. They didn't know I would stay up until 4 a.m. on borrowed Wi-Fi in cafes that didn't kick me out if I bought a single coffee. That I built a portfolio from scratch with nothing but a second-hand laptop and determination that tasted more like fury than ambition. They didn't know I cried in stairwells, that I skipped meals, that I missed birthdays, not because I forgot, but because I couldn't afford to get on a bus just to be ignored again. They didn't know that every time they posted photos of family dinners without me, I screenshotted them and told myself, one day, they'll remember the seat they left empty. They didn't know that I built a startup from the ground up with 3 strangers, who became my real family. People who didn't mock my ideas. People who didn't interrupt me when I spoke. People who asked how I was and actually meant it. They didn't know how many deals I closed with shaking hands because I was still convincing myself I belonged in the room. They didn't know about the nights I almost gave up. And they'll never know, not truly, the amount of strength it took not to go back and beg. Not to call. Not to show up unannounced on Mother's Day. Not to accept the few breadcrumbs of kindness they occasionally threw in my direction, just to keep me hoping. I erased myself to protect their comfort, and now I was done. They always said I was too sensitive, that I remembered things wrong, that I exaggerated. But the body doesn't lie. The memory of being left out sharpens like a blade you walk into again and again. And that night at the restaurant wasn't. T knew. It was the final verse of a song they'd been humming my whole life. But now, I was humming a different tune. In the morning, I opened a notebook, not for work, not for to-do lists, but for me. I wrote down every dream I had deferred because I didn't want to make them uncomfortable. Every no I accepted because I thought that's what love was, bending until you break. Every time I told myself that success didn't matter if they weren't proud. And then I wrote this sentence, they don't have to be proud of me, I do. I stared at it for a long time. It was the truth I had needed when I was 17 and crying behind the garage because no one came to my graduation. When I was 22 and scrolling through photos of family vacations I was never invited to. When I was 26 and celebrating a promotion alone. Lighting a cupcake in my apartment because no one called. I repeated it out loud again and again, my voice steadying, my chest lighter. That day, I put on a new suit. Not the one for business meetings, but one that made me feel like myself. I walked into my office with shoulders back and chin up. And for the first time, I didn't try to hide, I didn't speak softer. I didn't smile to make others comfortable. I was Lillian. Not the forgotten daughter, not the shadow, not the joke at the table. I was the woman who survived, who thrived, who became what they never thought I could. Not in spite of them, but because I finally stopped waiting for their permission. And the next time they'd see my name, it wouldn't be on a guest list they controlled. It would be in headlines they couldn't ignore. It was a Sunday morning. The kind of morning where the world is slow and lazy, wrapped in the smell of brewed coffee and early light. The kind where families gather at the table, flipping through the newspaper, trading sections between sips of tea and toast crumbs. And on that particular Sunday, my parents were doing exactly that. I know, because my aunt told me later. The local paper, the one they bragged about reading daily like it was a badge of cultural superiority, was delivered, as always, to their front porch. My father opened it with one hand, the other stirring his coffee. My mother sat across from him, scrolling on her phone, likely judging someone's outfit on social media, or leaving a passive-aggressive comment on a cooking forum. The silence between them, familiar, comfortable, cold. He unfolded the front page and there it was. My face. My name. A headline in bold black letters, from rejected to resilient. Lillian Rose social enterprise revolutionizes women's leadership across the nation. I could picture his hand freezing midair, my mother's eyes narrowing, her lips parting slightly in confusion, then in disbelief, then in panic. The article took up almost the entire center spread. A well-crafted feature written by a journalist who had spent weeks shadowing me and my team, capturing the heartbeat of the organization I had spent the last decade building. It wasn't a puff piece, it was raw, honest, and filled with truths I hadn't spoken aloud in years. The journalist had asked, gently, where did it all start? And I told her, not everything. Not the cruel words, not the birthday that turned into a humiliation. But I spoke of starting from nothing, of learning to rebuild when no one was watching. I mentioned family estrangement, vaguely, as something I had to survive to find myself. The article didn't drag them by name. It didn't need to. The truth has a way of vibrating through the silence, even without specifics. There was a photo, too. One taken on the rooftop of my office building, the skyline behind me, my arms crossed. Face relaxed but firm, a woman at peace with the war she'd won alone. There were quotes from women I had mentored, from girls who had attended our programs, from clients who said our initiatives had changed their lives. There were numbers, impact stats, case studies. And then, at the very bottom of the article, in a pull quote box framed in gold, you can build a table from nothing. And when they won't give you a seat, you realize you were never meant to beg for one. You were meant to own the room. Lillian Roy can only imagine the sound of the paper hitting the floor. The stunned silence, the phone slipping from my mother's hands, the color draining from both their faces as they registered the reality. I hadn't just survived. I had one. Not the way they expected. Not with compromise or obedience or marrying well or staying small. I had one loudly, with integrity, strategy, and strength they never bothered to believe I had. They hadn't just underestimated me. They had erased me. And now the world was printing my name. The aunt who told me all of this, she's always been on the periphery. The quiet observer in the family, the one who never said much but always saw everything. She called me, her voice trembling. They're in shock, Lillian, she whispered. They were laughing about yesterday. About the restaurant, and then they opened the paper. I didn't laugh. Not because it wasn't satisfying, oh, it was. But because I felt something deeper, a final severing, a quiet knowing. The truth had been spoken into the world and nothing would ever be the same again. That morning, my inbox flooded. Messages from women I hadn't heard from in years, from teachers, from old classmates, from strangers. Applause, gratitude, recognition. My phone buzzed constantly. I ignored most of it. I wasn't doing this for validation. But I allowed myself one thing. I forwarded the article to my own email. I wanted a copy for me. A personal reminder. Of who I became. Of how far I came from that girl standing outside a fancy restaurant. Being laughed at like a stray dog. That girl had become this woman. A leader, a founder. A name they'd whisper about now, not in dismissal, but in awe. I also knew something else. They'd try to spin it. My parents would likely claim credit. We always knew she'd do great things. She was always so stubborn, so ambitious. She took after her father's business sense. But the internet has a memory. And so do I. Every person who was at that restaurant knew. The photos, the whispers. The way I walked away with dignity while they sipped wine and snickered. Now, those same people were sharing the article, commenting things like, "Wow, Lillian. We're so proud of you. You were always destined for more. You deserve everything coming your way." Funny how quickly the tone shifts when success enters the room. That night, I framed the article. Not for vanity, for remembrance, because this wasn't about fame. It wasn't even about them anymore. It was about the girl I used to be. The one who watched family dinners from her bedroom door. The one who never got a cake with her name on it. The one who stayed quiet when they made her the joke. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was on the front page. By noon that same day, I was trending on local social media. The newspaper article had done its part. But the real explosion came from the people who had been there at the restaurant the night before. The people who watched me stand alone. While my own parents laughed in my face. Now, they had receipts. Now, they had context. Now, they were angry. It started with a single comment. Under the shared article, a woman named Teresa, the cousin of one of my old classmates, wrote, "Funny how the same parents who told her to go sit on the street yesterday are now claiming her as their daughter." I was there. I saw it all. That comment snowballed into a thread and then into several. People who had attended the birthday dinner began chiming in, recounting what they'd witnessed. I was at the next table, someone wrote. She showed up smiling, thought she was being surprised. There was no chair for her. Her own mother told her to sit outside. It was disgusting. I remember her from school. Another said, always quiet, always kind, can't believe her parents treated her like that. I wish I'd said something at the time. We all just watched it happen. Within hours, the comments became a wave of indignation. Screenshots of the article were being paired with photos from the dinner. Someone had caught my mother pointing and laughing while I stood still, clutching my purse, trying to process the humiliation. Those photos were now everywhere. People were tagging the restaurant, writing reviews about what they saw, shaming not just my family but the culture of cruelty they embodied, the smug elitism, the silencing of the child who didn't fit their mold, the need to control through shame. And right there in the middle of it, my parents were spiraling. They started with denial. "We didn't know she was coming. It was all a misunderstanding. She's always dramatic." But videos surfaced. My cousin had taken a short clip of the moment my mother told me to sit on the sidewalk, laughing with her wine glass raised like it was a joke for her amusement. The audio was clear. My face, my expression, was caught just as I turned to leave, silent, straight-backed, devastated. No one was laughing anymore. The comments turned brutal. "You raised her just to abandon her. What kind of parents treat their daughter like that in public? This is why so many women leave toxic families and build their own lives." I didn't post anything. I didn't need to. The truth was already screaming through every share, every tweet, every repost of the article with captions like, "Never underestimate the quiet one. She built herself while they laughed. Look who's laughing now." That afternoon, I received 5 missed calls from my mother, then 2 from my father, then a text, "Lillian, please. Let's talk." I let it sit. Then came a Facebook post from my parents. Their first public attempt to salvage their image. It was a black and white photo of me as a child, holding a book, smiling shyly. The caption read, "We are so proud of our daughter." Lillian, she's always been strong, always been a star. Her success means the world to us. The comments beneath, unrelenting. You forgot to add that you made her sit outside her own birthday dinner. Proud now that she's famous? This is the same woman you humiliated 24 hours ago. Don't rewrite history. The damage was done. They had tried to bury me in embarrassment. Now they were buried in public shame. Friends of theirs unfollowed them. Family members began messaging me, apologizing for their silence over the years. A few even confessed, we always knew something was wrong, we just didn't have the courage to speak up. I read every message. I didn't respond to most. But I saved one from an old teacher who had once seen me cry in class after being told by my mother that I wasn't worth the effort. It said simply, I knew you'd do something great. I'm sorry no one told you back then. It broke me. Not because it hurt, but because it healed something small. Later that evening, my aunt, the only one who had never joined the laughter, the only one who stayed seated and silent while I walked away, called again. They're a mess. She said, your mom's crying nonstop, your dad smashed a glass, they're ashamed. I asked her quietly, are they sorry because of what they did? Or because people saw it? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The panic my parents were feeling wasn't rooted in guilt, it was rooted in exposure. They had spent years sculpting an image of themselves, the perfect family, the proper couple with a difficult daughter who just never quite turned out like the others. They held that narrative up like a shield, but now the world saw the cracks, saw me. Not as the failure they tried to shape me into, but as the woman who walked away with grace and built her own platform while they clung to theirs. They had always believed I was beneath them. And now they were beneath the weight of the truth. That night, I turned off my phone, not to run away from the noise, but to let it echo without my voice. I didn't need to say anything. The world had already spoken, and my silence had never sounded so loud. The first message came at 3:12 a.m. My phone lit up in the dark bedroom, and I watched it blink from across the room, knowing exactly who it was from before I even touched the screen. My mother. We know we made mistakes. Please let us talk to you. We're your parents. We're sorry. Please call us. I didn't move. I just sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the words. They felt artificial. Not because they didn't sound sincere, but because they arrived too late, too conveniently, too close to the moment the public had finally turned its eyes toward them with judgment. In the days since the article went live, my parents had gone through every stage of public fallout. First denial, then silence, then a performance of pride. And now the scrambling apologies sent in the middle of the night as their shame grew louder than their control. By the time the sun rose, 3 more messages waited for me. One from my father. You made your point, enough now. Let's stop this before it gets worse. Call us. And then another from my mother, longer this time, filled with soft language I'd never heard from her mouth before. You've always been so independent. We didn't understand you back then, but we're learning now. It's not easy, but we're trying. Can we please meet for lunch, just to talk? Lunch. Like we were still some functional family with shared calendars and warm ketchups. Like I hadn't spent my entire childhood, my early adulthood, my 20s, fighting to survive their indifference, and yet I didn't delete the message. I didn't even block her. I just stared at the words, waiting to feel something that resembled the forgiveness they now hoped to squeeze out of me. But nothing came because I remembered everything. I remembered being 14, and overhearing my father say, she's the one we don't have to worry about, she'll never go far anyway. I remembered my mother's voice when I asked for a place at the university. You're not like your brother. Maybe focus on a simpler path. I remembered that birthday dinner just days ago when they handed everyone else glasses of wine, laughter, praise, and handed me nothing, not even a chair, not even acknowledgement, just a sneer and a joke about sitting outside on the pavement. Like I didn't belong anywhere near them. They didn't want me then, but now the world had placed me on a pedestal they couldn't reach. Now they wanted access not to my love, but to the spotlight I built from their rejection. I got another message the next afternoon. This time from my cousin. He had always been the one who followed orders, sat at the table, laughed when told to laugh. But now his message was different. I know I should have spoken out that night. I was there. I didn't say anything. I'm sorry. We all saw what happened. It wasn't right. That one I answered. Just one word, noted, because he was right. They all saw. And none of them said anything until the world told them it was safe to care. My inbox became a museum of delayed remorse. Ex-classmates wrote to say they always admired me from afar. Old family friends said they couldn't believe how cruel my parents had been. Even the restaurant manager sent a message, saying they were sorry for not intervening and wanted to offer me a private dining experience. On the house, I didn't reply. Because here's the truth no one wants to admit: forgiveness isn't about being the bigger person. When your abuser falls from grace, it's about choice, and I had a choice now. I could let them back in, let them sit across from Me with wet eyes and trembling voices, pretending they'd learned. Let them spin a new story where they were the victims of misunderstanding. Or I could let silence be my answer. The kind of silence they once used against me at every dinner, every celebration, every proud moment they pretended I didn't have. A few days later, my mother sent another message. We told people we'd be seeing you this weekend. Please don't embarrass us further. And just like that, there it was. The truth, buried in the last sentence. They weren't sorry for what they'd done. They were sorry that people knew it was never about me. It was about them, their image, their reputation, their desperate, sinking grasp on control. So I did what they never expected. I printed their messages, all of them, and I framed them. I put them on the wall of my study at home, next to the first award I ever won as an executive director, and the newspaper headline that called me the woman who refused to break, because those words, empty, late, and dripping in shame, reminded me of everything I survived. They reminded me that love, when forced, is not love. That guilt is not growth. That family isn't about shared blood, it's about shared truth. I looked at the wall for a long time that night. Then I lit a candle, opened my notebook, and began drafting my next keynote speech. The theme? What you lose when you try to bury your daughters, because I had a voice now, a powerful one. And no message at 3 a.m. could erase the journey it took to earn it. A week after the article was published and my inbox had quieted down into a dull, predictable hum of late apologies and performative affection, I received an email I never expected from the restaurant, the same restaurant, the one with the glittering chandeliers, the white tablecloths, the marble floor that echoed when I turned to walk away on the night of my birthday. Subject line: invitation to speak at our women's empowerment event. I almost laughed at first. I thought it was spam or a cruel joke. But the name at the bottom of the message was familiar. It was Isabel Romero, the PR and events coordinator. She had been there the night of my humiliation. I remembered her perfect bun, clipboard in hand, pretending not to hear my mother's mocking voice as it sliced through the air. Go sit on the street, haha. But this email was different. It started like this: Dear Ms. Lillian, we at Grand Palacio sincerely hope this message finds you well. Following the recent media coverage on your inspiring story of resilience and leadership, we are reaching out with a heartfelt invitation. I stopped reading halfway through. Something inside me tensed, not in anger, but in recognition. The same way one feels a phantom ache in a limb that's long since healed. They didn't care when I stood outside that restaurant in silence, when I walked to my car alone. But no cake, no chair, no one calling after me. But now that my name had weight, now that the world saw me differently, they wanted me back. Not as a daughter, not as a guest, not as a woman humiliated at the hands of her own family, but as a guest of honor. The irony was thick still. I kept reading. They were hosting a panel titled Voices That Rise, a night celebrating female executives, founders, and trailblazers in male-dominated industries. They wanted me to speak last. Headliner slot. They offered a generous honorarium, a luxury suite, full press coverage. They would even prepare a special birthday cake as a gesture, they said, if I'd let them. I closed a laptop. I sat with it for 2 days. Not because I was unsure if I wanted to go, but because I needed to understand why I was even considering it. I didn't owe them visibility. I didn't owe anyone a story. But what I did owe was something to myself. I owed myself the closure of returning through the same door they once denied me. And not to confront, not to humiliate in return, but to exist, loudly, unapologetic ally. So I accepted. The day of the event arrived. And I wore the same color my mother once mocked me for calling too bold. A crimson red suit, sharp lines, clean silhouette, heels that clicked with purpose. When I stepped out of the car, the doorman didn't hesitate. Welcome, Ms. Lillian, he said, bowing slightly, eyes wide. It's an honor. Inside, the room was packed. But this time, every seat had a name card. Every seat had been accounted for. Mine was center stage. I was escorted to a private area first, where a small team offered me refreshments and asked if I needed anything before going on. I declined. I only asked one thing. Can you tell me who's in the front row? They listed names. Influential women, politicians, editors, a few familiar executives, and then they said, almost apologetically, there's also a couple who insisted on attending, older, claimed they were related. They didn't RSVP officially, but they're sitting in the back. I nodded slowly. I didn't ask to have them removed. I didn't need to. Because tonight wasn't about them. The event began, the room quieted, speakers shared their journeys. There were tears, applause, laughter, and then it was my turn. I stepped up to the podium, and for a moment I didn't speak, I just looked at the sea of faces, and in the back, I saw them, my parents, small, shrinking. I breathed. Then I began. 2 months ago, I celebrated my birthday at home, quietly, alone. Not because I didn't have people who cared, but because I needed to remember who I was without the noise of people who never did. The audience leaned in, and exactly 1 year before that, I celebrated nothing. Because I had been invited to a dinner that had nothing to do with celebration, and everything to do with humiliation. I didn't name names, I didn't drag anyone publicly, but every word was sharp and soaked in truth. I told them about the sidewalk, about walking away, about rebuilding with nothing but my own will. I ended with this: your worth is not determined by the chair they offer you, or whether they even offer one at all. Your worth is in the ground you choose to stand on and in the voice you use. Once you get there, standing ovation. Afterward, people came to shake my hand, some cried. Others simply nodded, knowing what it meant to carry that kind of pain and still show up radiant. As I left the stage, a staff member approached me with a small envelope from the couple in the back. She said. I opened it later in the car. Inside, 2 words, written in unfamiliar handwriting that I somehow still recognized, were sorry. No name, no signature, just that. And I folded the note and tucked it into my coat pocket, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder that night wasn't their redemption. It was my return, and I didn't need them to witness it to make it real. But it was poetic that they did. I didn't cry that night. Not after the event, not in the car, not even when I got home and took off the suit that had become armor. I thought I might. I thought maybe I'd collapse into some deep emotion I had kept bottled for years, but instead I felt calm, still, as if something had finally clicked into place, something that had been misaligned for decades. I didn't return to that restaurant to make them watch. I returned to remind myself of what I had built when no one clapped for me, when no one saved a chair. That night became a symbol, not of revenge, but of reclamation, and in the days that followed I began to see everything more clearly. The people who once pitied me were now the ones fumbling for words. The same ones who had laughed at the sidewalk joke were now reposting articles about female resilience and tagging me. My phone was flooded with messages, some sincere, most not. Even a few old friends who had conveniently forgotten my birthday for years suddenly wanted to reconnect. But I didn't feel bitter, not anymore, because I had spent so much of my life trying to fit into rooms that had already decided I didn't belong. I had tried to soften myself, dim the glow, take up less space just to be allowed at a table where they never planned to feed me. And now, I owned my own damn table, and I got to choose who sat there. It was strange walking through the house that night, barefoot in silence, the hallway lights casting long golden shadows. The home that everyone once assumed I could never afford. The very place my parents had scoffed at, thinking I was just a maid, only to be told by someone else that I was, in fact, the owner. That word still echoes sometimes, owner, not just of a property, but of a story, my story, and no one was going to write it for me ever again. I thought of that little girl I used to be, the one who used to sit quietly at family gatherings, waiting for someone to notice her, waiting to be asked a question, waiting to be seen, and when they didn't, she convinced herself it was because she needed to work harder, achieve more, be better. But it was never about merit. It was about control. They only celebrated me when they could take credit, and they only included me when it cost them nothing. The moment I became too bright, too loud, too visible, I became inconvenient. So they tried to erase me, one birthday at a time. But here's the thing about invisibility. It doesn't last forever. Eventually, you learn that you can stand up, that your worth was never up for debate, that you don't need their validation, only your own voice. And once I found that voice, I never let it go. It echoed through the boardrooms I entered. It resonated with every woman who came up to me after a talk and whispered, "Thank you." I needed to hear that. It even carried through the silence of my mother's apology note, a silence louder than all the cruel laughter that came before. Now, when I host events, when I'm asked to speak, when I'm invited to panels or leadership summits, I do one thing before I accept. I ask, is there a seat for everyone? Because I know how it feels to be the one standing, pretending it doesn't sting, trying not to cry in public. And I know the power of what happens after that moment, when you stop asking to be included and start building your own place. I started a foundation this year. It's small, still growing, but its mission is simple: to support women who've been silenced by family, overlooked by institutions, underestimated by everyone. We give them the mic. We pull up chairs for them. We remind them they don't have to beg to belong, because that was always a truth I wish someone had told me sooner. You were never meant to sit quietly at their table. You were meant to build the stage and light it up. So now, every year on my birthday, I do something new. I don't throw a party. I don't book a restaurant. I don't cut a cake with a bunch of people who want to take pictures but never picked up the phone when it mattered. Instead, I write a letter to myself. I start with, "Dear Lillian, look how far you've walked from the sidewalk they told you to sit on." And I end with, "Your seat was never at their table. It was always waiting for you at the front of your own stage." And every time I write it, I believe it more deeply. Because I lived it. Now, so can anyone else.